Hey everyone, welcome back to Noria's Gear Talk podcast, where we are connecting reliability professionals with reliable information. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that we really haven't gone into a lot, and that's basically making sure that your maintenance structure, the organization itself, matches what we're trying to accomplish within our plant, within our program. And to do that, we are going to have Brian Brzinski, the founder of AMSS Consulting, come in. So, Brian, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, Wes, thanks for having me. This is great. I'm excited.
Oh, absolutely. And we're excited. You had a terrific session there at Reliable Plant Conference here in Chicago. And one of the whole goals here at our podcast is to make sure that the people connect, that the people understand where the information's coming from. So, Brian, if you don't mind, kind of give us a little bit of introduction about yourself.
Absolutely. So, I've been in maintenance and reliability for about 25 years. I've been in manufacturing for a little over 30. I started way back in the day in the steel mills in Northwest Indiana as a laborer, coal patch and blacktop and picking up garbage. That's where I started and got into operations. And then after a couple of years, was a maintenance apprentice as an electrical technician in the steel mill. So I was an E&I technician for a number of years. And from there, it just kind of grew. I went into production management, plant leadership, then eventually into reliability. And in reliability, I was blessed with a leader that said, you know what, educate yourself. All you can do is benefit us. And I was able to get out and get certified in Lean Six Sigma, TPM as a certified instructor from the JIPM, all the predictive technologies through category 3 or level 3. I know it's kind of old hat these days, but even the STLE, CLS back in the day, but have all of those, and it gave me this unique perspective, because coming from the shop floor and working your way up into executive leadership, you kind of know when things are happening to you, but you can sort of look at that and go, I don't want to treat somebody the way I got treated. So you do everything you can to try and mold that strategic or tactical implementation of a process with the end users in mind, the people that are going to give you that data. So my team and I have spent the last 12, 13 years making sure that we kind of customize a program against and centered around best practices, but something that fits and works and is sustainable for your environment, your culture, and your business.
And I think that's so important. And of course, having the background of basically from the ground up that you do, being a laborer and working your way through the field, you can understand that, culture is embedded in every single level of that. And yes, the topic we're going to go into here is our maintenance structure and our organization. People can get really scared when some, outside consultant, whether it's us here at Noria, yourself, anyone like that, comes in and starts to poke and prod around that. So in your experience, what have you seen, when it comes to the maintenance structure, and especially if the structure needs to change, where do you kind of start with that? What do you need to understand?
Well, the first thing that I like to do is I like to make sure that I understand what the culture of the plant is, what that environment looks like. So do they have a maintenance department, or do they have a repair department? Are they trying to maintain the function of the equipment, or are they being seen as just the people that go out and fix the equipment when it breaks?
Right.
And if you do that, then 90% of the time the structure of the department wouldn't support proactive activity, even if you wanted it to. Your skill sets don't match. Your job descriptions don't match. The business processes that you have, and how and who's supposed to do what. Your RACI, your responsibility matrices, none of them match.
Right.
And I find that a lot of times, we're going to add a CMMS, or we're going to put AI in, and you go back and, you don't have the fundamentals. So,
yeah,
how do we structure to support this? Because maintenance is, honestly, the maintenance department is a customer service organization to operations and production.
So yeah, it's in support of that. And I think you're right with the whole racing model. I was told once, and I really like this, where they say that processes, like whether it's in maintenance or reliability, so many times take on a person's name. This was Brian's way to do things, and it wasn't a role related thing. It was a person's name. And then all of a sudden Brian leaves, and it's, well, what are we supposed to do? That was Brian's way. You almost have to ingrain that into the actual process.
You do, and Wes, the other thing that I see a lot is, and I'm not gonna say anything against it, but you know, or you see acronyms or Japanese terms attached to everything. So
Sure.
a lot of cultures that are trying to make this change, they don't have anything to grab a hold of. They don't feel like they owned it. It feels like somebody bought a package, that they're
Yeah.
going to put this in place, and there's no ownership. You're just supposed to learn this and do what you're told. And you know, yes, in some instances you're supposed to, but it makes it a lot more effective and sustainable. It's less of an uphill climb if they have some ownership in this. So that's kind of how we start with when we assess things. It's kind of, what's your business process, and what are your goals? How do you guys operate, and why?
Brian, what you said about grabbing on a bunch of Japanese terms or terms that don't fit within an organization, right? I think it's great when people can rally behind an idea. It's portable, it's easy to understand, but that mantra does have to feel like it is in the voice of the facility. And structure of a maintenance organization, depending on who's doing what, the voice changes. Admittedly, the whole AI generation, and I write a lot of articles for our magazine, and there's that lure to use AI, but I know that it's not going to kick it out in my voice, and it's like almost disingenuous. So I mean, just trying to grab something from outside your culture, outside your plant, and just make it your own can be difficult with that.
It absolutely is, and that's the crux of this kind of change. I mean, the AI technology is new. The IIoT type of thing is not. Technology is getting
Yep.
cheaper,
Yes.
but I hear a lot of people say, well, it's gonna fix a lot of problems. It's gonna tell us what's wrong. Well, it will if you tell it what to look for and give it some foundation to actually learn from. But if you don't have a foundation, again, structure of your maintenance business processes, structure of your actual maintenance department, those types of things. If you don't have that in place, you're going to have a lot of data that isn't going to help you do anything, and it may actually even lead you down the wrong path.
So let's
Even if it's
get into
machine
the
learning.
structure. When we say restructuring, are we talking about who's doing what? Are we talking about what roles and what responsibility should be there? Is it a little bit of all of the above? What does restructuring a maintenance department mean to you?
So to your point, Wes, it means both. It could be more of one and less of another to understand. What are people doing today? How does work kind of flow through your process? Do you have work orders? Is there a planner scheduler somewhere? Who's doing what today, and where are the bottlenecks in your process to get the work completed, right? And the work order history that you have. Who's doing that? You know,
Do
um,
you do you find people have like a process map that they can actually go and point to and say this is how we do things, or do you often have to develop this with them?
We typically have to develop it with them, or take what they have, which is usually a one line diagram with about six boxes in it, which
Hmm.
is, not, it doesn't really help to get you lined out and go, we need to separate kind of how you identify work, how we plan and schedule the work, and then how we execute the work and what we do to follow it up. And this is a process of how, what becomes a work order, what's emergent, what's not emergent, what's an improvement versus a repair or corrective action. All those things kind of they define themselves. They kind of ferret themselves out when you do this with the business process, and then past the mapping of the process, then we start to look at the RACI matrix, right? Who's responsible and accountable? Who's actually doing any of this work? Who's actually doing these processes or following them? And what we find is, a lot of times, once that matrix is created and you look across the roles, you find a role that has 90% of the boxes checked, and everybody else has like 8. So you quickly find out
Right.
who's overloaded and who's expected to do all of this work, in their 8 to 10 hour workday, right? So then you say, okay, well, that structure is not going to work for all the things you need to get accomplished. How do we restructure that to support that? Right now you've got your technicians planning and scheduling. They're actually acting as their own inventory management people. Is that really the best use of their time to do all these things
Right.
that should be on somebody else to do? You know, that way you afford them the time to actually do like their lube routes, their condition monitoring routes, their PMs. If you don't understand that you're asking them to do 4 jobs and wear 4 different hats, you're going to keep spinning your wheels and constantly saying you don't have enough manpower.
Do you see organizations out there that do, let's call it, multi-craft, really well? Or do you see that it works best with dedicated teams? And we can use lubrication because that's what I'm most familiar with, right? We see lubrication spread across multiple departments, right? Whether it's maintenance, operations, reliability. Sometimes you see it dedicated to just lubrication. And it seems like those that dedicate technicians to do the work tend to have more ownership, more buy-in. But I'm kind of curious, in your experience, where have you seen some of this stuff work and not work?
So I'm going to say that it matters dependent on the equipment base, the size
Okay.
and complexity of a facility, and whether or not you can afford to have segregated responsibilities, segregated roles to do specific things.
Now, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to dig into that word afford. When you say afford to, is that a constraint of time or resource, or is it actually monetary afford? What do you think?
Well, it's actually all three. It's actually all three. So if I'm in a small, and I'll pick on this one, a small fertilizer plant that literally only has 8 employees in the entire plant, and there's 2 lines, and there's only about maybe 14 motors and maybe 50 bearings overall,
Okay.
right? A separate lube team doesn't really make a lot of financial sense, right?
No, it may
To
be a
pay for
day a
that to
week
pay
or
for that
something.
role.
Right.
Right. So if I have a mechanic, or even if it's a multi-craft person, and I'm gonna say, look, today is your lube day, and I'm gonna train that person up to do it with precision and with quality and with intent, then they're gonna be fine. Now, but if I go into like a large paper mill, and you have the wet end, the dry end, the converting end, there's a lot more equipment there. There's a lot more rotating equipment. There's a lot more bearings and gearboxes, and the asset base is going to be in the millions of dollars for just the rotating equipment. Well, that I think is worth putting, and the number of man hours just to be able to do your lube routes. You're talking about 40 to 60 hours a week anyway,
Yeah.
because of all the points you have to go to and oil samples you have to take. So yeah, there should be a dedicated lube person there. Even if they're a mechanic or a technician by trade, their focus needs to be on lubrication.
So dedicating staff, complexity of the equipment definitely goes in that. Do you see within maintenance, there are subsets of this, like you mentioned, identifying the work, planning the work, right? Planners and schedulers in most cases tend to be a dedicated role where people are doing this if there's enough work, I suppose, to make sense. But what are some of these areas where you think you can share the responsibility across multiple, people or multiple roles?
Well, again, it depends on the size and scale and the complexity. I've worked in large scale companies where the planning and the scheduling function were actually separate roles because the volume
Okay.
of work was necessary. Large steel mills, you have a maintenance force of 30 people, 40 people. And
Right.
you've got PM's corrective actions, you've got a couple of different specialties a lot of times with like transformer maintenance or crane maintenance. Those are all kind of special skills. So you have separate planners for each group, depending on the size. Some of the things that I mean, you can create multi-craft and it works probably
Yeah.
85% of the time. But then you start to find you need more contractors because you have a jack of all trades and a master of none. So now the things you need mastery of have gotten larger because you don't have it
Yeah.
anymore. You just have general skills. So you end up using more contractors to do things that you used to do yourself. The The other couple of roles that I've seen get merged, and I'm not a fan of supervisor slash planner. I'm not a fan of that one at
Okay.
all because it really pulls away from the efficiencies and effectiveness of a planner scheduler to actually perform their job function. I'm not a fan of seeing technicians perform their own planning and scheduling, which seems to be the trend a lot of times for people that want to cut headcount. And that one's kind of tricky because you never get on top of how many man hours I actually need to get the work done.
Mm,
And
because
when you
it
get the
blurs
work
the line
done,
between the planning.
it does, and it also, your technicians were never trained to be planners, so they don't really understand how to prioritize the work. It's usually whatever supervisor says you're going to go do this now, drop what you're doing. And the whole point behind a planner, scheduler, and a supervisor and a technician is so they can focus on their job, they can focus on their skills or their craft without necessarily having to jump from one thing to the other, right? Go searching for parts, go searching for drawings, wait for a machine, negotiate with a supervisor. Those kinds of things they take away from effectiveness in such a big way that it just doesn't you get less done. So in a 40-hour work week for a single person, instead of getting, 25 to 27 hours worth of actual wrench time out of them, you get about 14. And the rest of the time is spent, kind
Mhm.
of picking up the pieces of what another job would be. So if I have 500 man hours of work to get done in a week, I'm going to need, 50 people to get it all done versus the 10 people that I have because I don't have a planner that's organizing their workday.
Streamlining it, and there's the efficiencies. I feel like we've picked on the, let's say, the technicians and maybe plant floor level people. Let's elevate this a little bit higher and go into what would be traditional salaried professionals, because I'm sure there's organizational benefits based on how they're structured as well, right?
Correct. So, and I think this trend actually started back in more with the Lean Six Sigma community with that group, where you saw people coming in as process engineers and their whole job was continuous improvement. And they really had no other responsibilities other than identifying continuous improvement opportunities and coordinating those improvements and then monitoring and tracking the progress of the project. Um, in the last probably 15, 18 years, you're starting to see a lot more reliability engineers that are dedicated to reliability, and you're taking it off the maintenance manager's head and off the supervisor to be able to come up with proper reliability programs, condition-based maintenance programs, the things that you really need to be effective and efficient to keep your equipment running at peak performance and availability.
Yeah, and I mean, with that, it does allow people to come up with maybe a better thought out game plan instead of just a simple, we need to do better in this, but now actually have a way that we can implement these changes and make them maybe more sustainable as well.
Absolutely. So, one of the things I always kind of pick on when I talk about a PM program, whether it's PM optimization or just PM review, the goal of a PM is to find a defect, find a corrective action that needs to be managed, which means the failure mode is now starting to exhibit
Correct.
itself to where you have to respond to it. Well, if I have a bunch of PMs that I kind of just do because they're due on this schedule and I don't find anything, if you don't have a dedicated reliability person there, you're not really going to go back until after you've had a failure that wasn't part of the PM to have to change the
Yeah.
PM, right? To change your condition-based maintenance. So that with the advent of bringing reliability engineers and managers and whole teams on board, you kind of find those things and you review them and you dig them out based on equipment failure and PM review to be able to increase, sort of bring your PMs to be in higher quality, better defined. They're actually attacking the failure modes that are exhibiting. You can't get around regulatory things, EPA type things or
Right.
OSHA type things, or if you're in a food and beverage, right, like food safety kind of stuff. You can't get around those. You have to do them based on time, but you can certainly do other things around failure modes that you didn't see coming or you didn't know or weren't part of like a PSM program to be able to prevent those things from happening.
I was going to say, I love this term, and you've used it several times, maintenance business process. And I think it's important, the word business in that, of how, and you said in support of operations, in support of the business. And I do feel like that is sometimes lost, where maintenance or even reliability is felt like an afterthought, and maybe not given the focus or even the credit that it's due for the process that it brings into the organization.
Absolutely, and it should be tied that way, top to bottom. When you look at a manufacturing company, regardless of how many products they make, they really only do one thing. They convert a raw material into a finished good. And to be able to do that in a very oversimplified way, you only need two things to do that, and that's people and machines. So you should spend most of your time figuring out how to support the people and the machines to be able to convert that raw material into a finished good at the lowest possible cost, with the most effectiveness and efficiencies, with the highest level of quality. And if you look at that just from an OEE calculation, right? Availability is first for a reason. Then we work on throughput.
The machine has to be turned on.
Exactly.
It has to be running.
Available. It doesn't have to run. It doesn't have to run its best. The availability calculation doesn't care what the machine speed is. All it cares about is that it's available for use. And once we can get it running, in that high 90s range, where you've got 2-3% max of downtime, unplanned downtime, maybe it's 2%. Then I can really focus on where my variability is and why I'm not running to a certain speed. Once I figured that out, now I can understand what's causing my quality losses. And it's pretty simple. It's man, method, machine, or material. Which one is it? And let's go after it and fix it.
Nah, I love it, Brian. We're running low on time, but I want to give you the last word. I've really enjoyed this conversation. But if someone tuning in here to think about the structure of their organization, maybe give them some of your pro tips that you have.
So again, the first thing I would do is look at what's my goal in maintenance. If you're trying to become more proactive, then you need to kind of look at what the roles and responsibilities are of the people that you have in your department. Do you have people that are overloaded? Run through a business process map that makes sense. Segregate them out so that you have specific different process maps to see who's getting overloaded, who's not. And do you even have a breakdown of the responsibilities and accountabilities in your department that are going to make you successful? And if you don't, then you probably need to look at restructuring your department. And I would use that business process map and your RACI matrix as a foundation for rewriting your job description, so that you're not only training the people that you have to the right job and the right roles, but you can actually use that as a sourcing tool when recruiting to replace or hire new people.
That's awesome, Brian. And just for everyone listening, best way to get in contact with you would be what?
You know what? You can find us on our website, which is amssconsulting.com. You can email me directly. It's b.brzinski at AMSS Consulting. And I get everybody's emails. It's probably the easiest way and the most successful way to get a hold of me. The phone, if I'm in a plant, I don't always hear my phone. And after 14 hours, I'm usually focused on calling my wife and my kids and then going to sleep. So you know what? Email is usually the best. I usually respond that day, or usually within another day or two at the latest.
Well, Brian, I definitely appreciate you stopping by. I'd love to have you on again, because I do feel like there's more to unpack through this. And for everyone that's joined us for Gear Talk, thank you so much for listening. As always, please like and subscribe. And if you have any comments, questions, or topics that you'd like us to address, you can always email us at podcast@noria.com. I'm Wes with Gear Talk. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you here on the next episode.